The world knew him as Cedric Hollander, the self-made titan of technology, a man whose ambition was etched into the skyline of New York City. At every gala, every product launch, he stood at the podium, a portrait of power. And beside him, always a step behind, was his beautiful wife, Angelica, his anchor, his quiet supporter. But what if the anchor was actually the entire ship, hidden beneath the waves? What if the man everyone saw as a king was merely the public face of a hidden empire, an empire ruled by the one person he thought he knew best? This isn't a story about a successful man. It's the story of the moment his entire reality was shattered by a 5-word sentence from the woman sleeping in his bed. "You work for me, Cedric." The air in the Metropolitan Museum of Art's Grand Hall was thick with the scent of money and lilies. It was the annual AuraCorp Foundation Gala, the crown jewel of New York's philanthropic calendar, and Cedric Hollander was holding court. At 42, he possessed the restless energy of a man half his age, his dark hair artfully graying at the temples, his bespoke suit a second skin. His company AuraCorp was a behemoth, its revolutionary data optimization software running the world's most powerful institutions. "The key is relentless forward momentum," Cedric declared to a captive circle of admirers, including a senator and the editor of Forbes. "You can't just anticipate the future. You have to build it brick by digital brick." A few feet away, Angelica Angie Pierce, his wife of 10 years, smiled serenely. She was the epitome of understated elegance in a simple navy gown, a stark contrast to the glittering peacocks around her. She spoke quietly with the museum's curator about a recent acquisition, her knowledge of 17th century art surprisingly deep. To the outside world, she was the perfect billionaire's wife, beautiful, gracious, and utterly uninterested in the gritty world of corporate warfare that her husband dominated. She hosted his dinners, managed their homes, and provided a tranquil harbor from his turbulent life. Later that evening, in the back of their chauffeured Maybach, as it sliced through the rain-slicked streets of Manhattan, Cedric was still buzzing. "Did you see the look on Senator Coleman's face when I outlined our Q4 projections? We're not just a company anymore, Angie. We're an institution." "It was an impressive speech, Cedric," she said, her voice calm and smooth. "You have a gift for captivating a room." "A gift?" he scoffed lightly, loosening his tie. "It's not a gift, it's a weapon. It's control. You have to project absolute certainty even when you don't feel it." He looked over at her, his gaze softening slightly. "Thank you for handling the seating chart. Abernathy was pleased to be next to the ambassador. Small details like that matter." "Of course," she said, looking out at the blurred city lights. "I'm happy to help." It was their dynamic, a well-oiled machine. He was the engine, she was the elegant chassis. He conquered the world, she made sure his home was a sanctuary. He never noticed the way she absorbed every piece of information, the subtle way her questions over breakfast often guided his thinking for the day. He'd mention a problem with a supply chain algorithm, and she'd ask an innocuous question, like, is it a sequencing issue or a resource allocation problem? It reminds me of how shipping lanes were managed during the Second World War. Cedric would have a flash of insight, crediting his own genius, never tracing it back to her quiet prompt. Their penthouse overlooking Central Park was less a home and more a monument to his success. Glass, steel, and minimalist art. The only space that felt truly hers was a small, soundproofed study at the back of the apartment, which he called her hobby room. It housed her orchids, her extensive collection of historical biographies, and a custom-built computer rig he'd bought her a few years ago. "For your online shopping and book clubs," he'd said with an indulgent smile. He had no idea that her book club was a network of elite programmers, data scientists, and market analysts scattered across the globe, all communicating through heavily encrypted channels. He had no idea that the gardening simulations she ran on her supercomputer were in fact complex, predictive models of global market trends. He had no idea that the quiet, art-loving woman beside him was the architect, and he was just the most visible part of the machinery. The first tremor came on a Tuesday. Cedric was in a board meeting presenting a bold, aggressive plan for acquiring a smaller German tech firm. His phone buzzed an emergency alert from his CFO. He ignored it. Then it buzzed again. And again. Finally, he excused himself. "What is it, George?" He snapped into the phone. "Gideon Reed." The CFO's voice was tight with panic. "He's initiated a hostile takeover." The name hit Cedric like a physical blow. Gideon Reed was a corporate raider, a vulture who circled successful companies, found a weakness, and tore them apart for profit. He was ruthless, brilliant, and he had a personal history with Cedric. Years ago, they had been rivals, and Cedric had publicly humiliated him in a deal that made AuraCorp a household name. Reed had been nursing that grudge ever since. "How?" Cedric demanded, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "Our financials are rock solid. Our stock is at an all-time high." "He's not attacking our finances," George said. "He's attacking our core product. He's released a white paper, co-authored by a team from MIT, claiming a fundamental security flaw in the Aura optimization algorithm. He says it's vulnerable to a specific type of quantum decryption." Cedric felt the blood drain from his face. "That's impossible. It's a lie." "Is it our stock has dropped 17% in the last hour, Cedric? The market is spooked. Reed is calling for an emergency shareholders meeting. He's coming for your chair." Cedric hung up the phone, his mind racing. He strode back into the boardroom, his earlier confidence replaced by a cold fury. The acquisition was forgotten. He was now in a fight for the life of his company. His company. That night, he barely spoke to Angie. He paced the length of their penthouse, a glass of scotch in his hand, barking orders into his phone. Lawyers, PR teams, cybersecurity experts. He was mobilizing his army. Angie watched him from the doorway of the living room, her expression unreadable. "Is everything all right?" she asked softly. "It's business?" He clipped, not looking at her. "Gideon Reed is making a play. It's baseless a smear campaign, but I have to crush it and crush it fast." He finally turned to her, his eyes blazing. "This is the kind of fight you wouldn't understand, Angie. It's not about logic or fairness. It's about power, brute force." She met his gaze, her own eyes steady. "Sometimes the strongest force isn't the one that makes the most noise." He laughed, a harsh, humorless sound. "Spoken like a true philosopher. Right now I don't need philosophy. I need a battering ram." He dismissed her with a wave of his hand and turned back to the window, staring down at the city he believed he owned. In her study, long after Cedric had fallen into a restless, Scotch-fueled sleep, Angie sat before her triple monitor setup. Her fingers moved with silent, blistering speed across the keyboard. On one screen, a secure communication channel was open. "Lena, he's in. Reed's made his move." The reply was instantaneous. "I see the market chaos. Are we activating Phoenix Protocol?" Angie paused, her eyes closing for a fraction of a second. The Phoenix Protocol was her ultimate contingency, a series of deeply embedded corporate and financial maneuvers designed to protect her true creation. She had built this empire from the shadows, patenting the core algorithm under a shell corporation years before she even met Cedric. She'd chosen him to be the face, the charismatic salesman, while she remained the invisible genius. It was safer that way. But now Gideon Reed's attack wasn't just threatening Cedric's position, it was threatening her life's work. Not yet. Let's see how the king plays his hand first. But get the assets ready. It's time to remind the world who holds the real power. She looked at a framed photo on her desk. It was of her and Cedric on their honeymoon, both of them young, happy, and full of dreams. A sad smile touched her lips. She had given him a kingdom to rule, and he had become so enamored with the crown that he'd forgotten who built the throne. The next 2 weeks were a blur of controlled chaos. Cedric Hollander, a man accustomed to being on the offensive, found himself in a desperate defensive crouch. Gideon Reed's assault was surgical and relentless. It wasn't just the white paper. It was a multi-front war. News articles appeared seemingly out of nowhere, questioning AuraCorp's corporate ethics. Key engineers were poached by a rival firm, a firm secretly funded by one of Reed's holding companies. A class-action lawsuit alleging data misuse was filed in Delaware. Every move Cedric made was anticipated, every countermeasure deflected. When his PR team issued a statement decrying the security flaw as a fabrication, Reed's team released a coded proof-of-concept video showing the vulnerability being exploited. When Cedric's legal team tried to file for an injunction, they found themselves buried in jurisdictional challenges filed by a dozen different law firms. It was like fighting a hydra. For every head he cut off, 2 more grew in its place. The pressure was taking its toll. The charismatic, unflappable CEO was gone, replaced by a haggard, paranoid man who saw enemies in every shadow. He snapped at his most loyal executives and spent his nights mainlining coffee and staring at stock tickers bleeding red. His relationship with Angie became strained to the breaking point. He moved into one of the guest suites, claiming he didn't want to disturb her with his late-night calls, but the truth was, he couldn't bear her placid calm. It felt like a judgment on his own frantic impotence. One evening he found her in the main library reading a biography of Catherine the Great. "I don't know how you can just sit there and read," he said, his voice raw with exhaustion. "My entire world is on fire, and you're reading about some Russian empress." Angie carefully placed a bookmark in her book and looked up at him. "She faced a coup led by her own husband," she said evenly. "She survived by securing the loyalty of the Imperial Guard and the clergy while he was busy posturing. She understood that power isn't always where you think it is." Cedric stared at her, uncomprehending. "What the hell does that have to do with anything? This is not a history lesson, Angie. This is my life." "I was just trying to offer some perspective," she replied, her voice soft but firm. "Reed is making you emotional. He wants you to be the raging bull. A bull is powerful, but it's predictable. It always charges at the red cape. And what am I supposed to do? Be a snake in the grass?" He sneered. "That's not my style." "Perhaps it should be," she said, rising from her chair. "Have you looked into the origins of the MIT team that co-authored the paper? Of course I have. They're clean, top of their field, unimpeachable." "No one is unimpeachable, Cedric," she said, walking towards the door. "Look at their graduate theses. Look at who funded their postdoc research. Follow the money. It never lies." He watched her leave a knot of resentment tightening in his chest. Follow the money. What did she know about corporate espionage? Her days were filled with caterers and florists. The sheer audacity of her advice was insulting. He dismissed it instantly, attributing it to a naive, simplistic view of his complex world. He was the expert, not her. But what Cedric didn't know was that while he was fighting the visible war, Angie was waging a clandestine one. From her hobby room, she operated under the digital pseudonym Phoenix. Phoenix was a legend in certain elite underground circles, a ghost who could move capital restructure code and manipulate data with terrifying efficiency. Only a handful of people knew Phoenix's true identity, one of whom was Dr. Lena Hansen, a reclusive cybersecurity genius living in a remote cabin in Washington state. The bull is charging, just as we predicted. He's exhausted and blind with rage. Reed is playing him like a fiddle. The vulnerability is real, Angie. It's not the one Reed is publicizing, but there is a deeper one, a back door I helped you build into the original source code, the Cerberus key. If Reed's people find that we're finished, they won't. He's looking for a flaw in the front door. He won't think to check if the architect built a secret passage for herself. He's too arrogant for that. But his campaign is eroding shareholder confidence. We need to stabilize the stock. How every institutional investor is dumping their shares. We create a new buyer, an unknown entity that starts buying up AuraCorp stock in massive strategic blocks, not enough to trigger alarms, but enough to create a flaw to stop the freefall. We'll use the Helios Fund. Helios Ventures was Angie's masterpiece, a Cayman Islands-based holding company, so labyrinthine and opaque that it was for all intents and purposes invisible. It was where the true wealth and ownership of AuraCorp resided. Cedric was the CEO of the public entity, but Angie, through Helios, was the silent majority owner. He received a lavish salary, stock options, and all the trappings of power, but he was in essence an employee. A very well compensated one, but an employee nonetheless. Over the next few days, a strange pattern emerged in the market. Just as AuraCorp stock seemed poised to collapse, a mysterious surge of buying would prop it up. Wall Street analysts were baffled. They attributed it to rogue algorithmic traders or a contrarian hedge fund making a risky bet. No one could identify the source. Cedric noticed it too. It was the only thing giving him a sliver of hope. "Someone's betting on us," he told his CFO, a flicker of his old confidence returning. "Some silent partner out there still believes in me." He was half right. Someone was betting on the company. He was just wrong about who. Angie, meanwhile, followed her own advice. While Cedric was fighting fires, she was digging at the roots. She tasked Lena with a deep dive into the financials of the MIT researchers. It took 3 days of relentless, borderline illegal hacking, but Lena found it. A thread. A small, obscure research grant awarded to one of the lead authors 5 years prior. The grant came from a foundation that was after digging through 6 layers of shell corporations funded by none other than Gideon Reed. It was the smoking gun. She printed the documentation, a complex web of transactions and hidden connections, and left the file on the desk in Cedric's home office, placing it right on top of his keyboard where he couldn't miss it. She didn't say a word. The next morning, Cedric found the folder. He read it, his eyes widening with each page. He felt a jolt of exhilaration. This was it. The proof that Reed had orchestrated the entire fraud. He never once stopped to wonder how this impeccably researched, highly confidential information had simply appeared on his desk. His mind, so focused on his own survival, immediately claimed the discovery as his own. He burst into the kitchen where Angie was arranging flowers. "I've got him," he yelled, waving the folder. "I knew if I dug deep enough I'd find the rot. The bastard has been funding his pet scientists for years. I'm going to ruin him." Angie looked up from a white orchid, her expression placid. "That's wonderful news, darling. Wonderful, it's a goddamn miracle." He was ecstatic already, dialing his lead counsel. "Set up a press conference. I want every major news outlet there. We're going on the attack." He didn't thank her. He didn't ask where the file came from. In his world, the victory was his alone. The cracks in his empire were starting to show, but his ego, a fortress unto itself, remained impenetrable. He couldn't see that the very ground beneath his feet was held together by a force he refused to acknowledge. Cedric's press conference was a masterpiece of corporate theatre. He was back in his element, commanding, defiant and righteous. He didn't just present the evidence linking Gideon Reed to the researchers, he weaponized it. He painted Reed not as a competitor, but as a saboteur, a criminal who had attempted to defraud the market and destroy a great American company for personal vengeance. This was never a corporate dispute, Cedric thundered from the podium, his voice echoing through the packed ballroom. This was a criminal conspiracy, and we will be pursuing every legal avenue to see that Mr. Reed and his co-conspirators are brought to justice. The effect was immediate and dramatic. Oracorp's stock, which had been stabilized by the mysterious buyer, rocketed upward. The narrative flipped overnight. Cedric was no longer the embattled CEO. He was the valiant defender of his company, a corporate lion who had stared down a jackal and won. The board, which had been wavering, rallied behind him. The sense of crisis evaporated, replaced by a euphoric wave of relief and admiration. But Gideon Reed was not so easily defeated. He was a man who played chess, while others played checkers. The public revelation of his connection to the MIT team was a setback, a painful one, but it wasn't checkmate. He had anticipated this possibility. While the world was focused on Cedric's triumphant press conference, Reed initiated the second phase of his attack, something far more insidious. He began targeting Oracorp's clients. Using a different set of researchers, he started circulating private, confidential security audits to Oracorp's top-tier customers, banks, government agencies, and defense contractors. These new reports didn't focus on the publicized vulnerability. Instead, they hinted at a deeper, more systemic rot within Oracorp's code, a suggestion that the entire platform was a black box whose true workings were known only to a select few. He was planting a seed of doubt, not in the public market, but in the minds of the people who paid the bills. The calls started coming in a week later. Cautious inquiries from chief technology officers, demands for independent code reviews. One of Oracorp's oldest clients, a multinational investment bank, announced it was putting its contract renewal under review. It was a subtle, creeping poison, far more dangerous than the public stock battle. Cedric was baffled. They're citing structural integrity concerns, he vented to his executive team. What the hell does that even mean? We passed every security audit for the last decade. He was losing control of the narrative again, and this time there was no simple file he could wave at a press conference. This was a battle of trust, and he was losing it. The euphoria of his victory faded, replaced by a gnawing anxiety. It was during this time that he began to hear whispers of Phoenix. The name first surfaced in a conversation with a contact at the Pentagon, a major Oracorp client. "We're running our own internal stress tests on your system, Cedric," the general had said over a secure line. "And we're seeing anomalies. It's like someone is patching vulnerabilities before our engineers can even fully identify them. The fixes are elegant, almost invisible. My tech people are spooked. They're calling the source Phoenix." Cedric's interest was piqued. A vigilante coder, a white hat hacker who was a fan of Oracorp. A few days later, the CEO of the investment bank called him. "We're still under review." Cedric, the CEO, said, his tone less hostile than before. But something strange happened. Our security team was running a penetration test based on Reed's new report. They thought they'd found a significant exploit. But when they tried to replicate it, the pathway was gone. It had been sealed. One of my guys said it was like the system was healing itself in real time. They traced the source of the patch to an encrypted, untraceable node. They've picked up chatter about it on the deep web. They call it Phoenix. Cedric became obsessed. This Phoenix was his guardian angel. While he was fighting a public war with lawyers and press releases, This shadow player was fighting on the digital front lines, outmaneuvering Reed's technical attacks with a skill that bordered on precognition. Finding Phoenix became his top priority. He saw this person as his ultimate weapon, the key to finally crushing Reed and securing his legacy. He tasked his best cybersecurity team with a single mission: find Phoenix. "I don't care what it costs," he told them. "Use any resource. I want to know who this person is. I want to hire them. I want to put them on the board." The hunt was fruitless. Phoenix left no traces. The code was a ghost, the patches seamless. It was as if the system's original architect was performing maintenance from a higher plane of existence. The dramatic irony was thick enough to be suffocating. Every night, Cedric would come home, exhausted from the search, and vent his frustrations to Angie. "This Phoenix is a genius, Angie. A complete ghost," he'd say, pacing the living room. "Whoever they are, they know my algorithm better than the people who wrote it. It's uncanny. It's like they're inside my head." Angie would listen patiently, her needlepoint in her lap or a book resting in her hands. She'd offer calm, measured responses. "Perhaps they're not a stranger," she suggested one night. "Perhaps it's someone who has a vested interest in AuraCorp's survival." "It has to be." Cedric agreed, completely missing her point. "A former employee, maybe. Someone I fired years ago who still feels a sense of loyalty. I've had my team digging through the personnel files of every programmer we've ever employed." The search for Phoenix consumed him, turning from a professional quest into a personal one. The mysterious figure represented a level of brilliance he respected and, in a way, envied. He imagined Phoenix as a reclusive, hoodie-wearing prodigy, a mirror image of the tech geniuses he'd read about. He never once considered the quiet, elegant woman who organized his social life and slept in the bedroom down the hall, while Cedric's multi-million-dollar security team chased digital shadows. Angie continued her work from her study. She and Lena were in constant contact. "Your husband's goons are getting close. They almost breached one of my firewalls. They're good, but they're loud, like elephants trying to sneak through a forest. Let them chase their tails. They're a useful distraction. While they're hunting for a ghost, I'm fortifying the system." Reed's latest probe was dangerously close to the Cerberus key. He's smarter than I gave him credit for. What's the next move? You can't keep patching holes forever. Sooner or later he'll find something that sticks, or Cedric's team will stumble onto me, and by extension, you. I know. The end game is approaching. Cedric's victory was temporary. Reed's attack on our clients is hurting us. The board is getting nervous again. Old man Abernathy called me today. Arthur Abernathy was the longest-serving member of the board, a relic from the company's early days. He had always been fond of Angie. What did he want? The usual. Asking how I was holding up, how Cedric was coping with the pressure. But there was something else in his voice. Doubt. He's the conscience of the board. If he's starting to waver, the others will follow. So what now? Do you finally bring Phoenix out of the shadows? Angie stared at the screen, her fingers hovering over the keyboard. She thought of Cedric, of his pride, of the life they had built, however imbalanced it was. Revealing herself would save the company, but it would shatter the man she was married to. It was a choice she had been dreading for a decade. Not yet. There's one last move to make in the shadows. Reed has a weakness. His entire empire is built on leverage, a mountain of debt that funds his raids. You're going to short his primary creditor. I'm going to buy it. A slow smile spread across her face. Cedric was trying to win a battle. She was about to win the war. He was searching for a shadow player, completely unaware that he was married to the Queen, while Angie as Phoenix was orchestrating a multi-billion-dollar financial maneuver to cripple Gideon Reed's funding. Cedric was losing his grip. The client defections were becoming a torrent. The quiet poison Reed had injected into the corporate bloodstream was working. Trust once lost was nearly impossible to regain. The AuraCorp board, which had been so quick to celebrate Cedric's press conference victory, was now in a state of quiet panic. The pressure culminated in a tense emergency board meeting. It was held not in the gleaming AuraCorp tower, but in the somber wood-panelled office of Arthur Abernathy, the board's elder statesman. The mood was funereal. "The stock price is irrelevant if we have no clients. Cedric," Abernathy said, his voice heavy with disappointment. "Gideon Reed is eating us alive from the inside out. He's made us look unreliable, unstable. And your public feud with him is making the market nervous. They see two gladiators in a death match, and they don't want to be in the arena." "I'm handling it," Cedric insisted, his voice sharper than he intended. "How?" Another board member, a pragmatic woman named Joyce, shot back. "Your cybersecurity teams are running in circles looking for a ghost hacker, and our sales team is getting slaughtered. We've lost the First National Bank contract. They were with us for 12 years. The news hit Cedric like a punch to the gut. He hadn't been told. His own team was keeping him out of the loop. He looked around the room and saw it in their faces, the doubt, the pity. They were losing faith in him. It was then that Gideon Reed played his trump card. He hadn't just been attacking AuraCorp's clients. He'd been digging, and he'd found something that even Angie hadn't anticipated. He hadn't found the Cerberus key or her secret ownership, but he'd stumbled upon the original incorporation documents for the shell company under which Angie had first patented the core algorithm years before AuraCorp even existed. The company was called Helios Labs. The patents were later legally and properly transferred to AuraCorp, but Reed had found the origin, and the name of the sole director of Helios Labs was not Cedric Hollander. It was Angelica Pierce. Reed didn't understand the full scope of what he was looking at, but he knew it was a weapon. He leaked the documents not to the press, but directly to Abernathy. Abernathy slid a thin file across the polished mahogany table towards Cedric. "Gideon Reed sent this to me this morning. He says it's proof that the intellectual property upon which this entire company is built may not be as secure as we believed. He's framing it as a potential ownership crisis." Cedric opened the folder. He saw the unfamiliar name, Helios Labs. And then he saw the signature on the bottom line of the patent application, Angelica Pierce. He stared at it, his brain refusing to process the information. Angelica. His Angie. The woman who organized charity galas and worried about flower arrangements. It had to be a mistake, a forgery, a different Angelica Pierce. "This is absurd," he stammered. "It's another one of Reed's fabrications." "Is it?" Abernathy asked gently. "The patent number is correct. The timeline predates your founding of AuraCorp. Cedric, what is Helios Labs?" Cedric had no answer. He felt the floor dissolve beneath him. He had built his identity, his entire world, on the story that he was the visionary, the creator of AuraCorp. This document suggested he was at best a latecomer, at worst a fraud. The meeting ended disastrously. The board didn't oust him, not yet, but they stripped him of his unilateral authority, forming an oversight committee to manage the crisis. It was a vote of no confidence in everything but name. He was a king in name, only a prisoner on his own throne. He left the meeting in a daze and went home, the damning file clutched in his hand. He stormed through the penthouse, a tempest of confusion, betrayal and wounded pride. He found Angie in the solarium tending to her orchids. "What is this?" he roared, throwing the file down on a glass table. The orchids trembled. Angie looked at the file, then back at him. Her face was calm, but her eyes were filled with a sadness he had never seen before. "It's old paperwork," she said quietly. Old paperwork. It has your name on it. It claims you patented my algorithm, he shouted, his voice cracking. My life's work. What is Helios Labs? What is this Angie? Some project you worked on in college? Did Reed dig this up to try and embarrass me? It wasn't your algorithm, Cedric, she said, her voice still quiet, but now laced with steel. It was my algorithm. I designed it during my postgraduate work at Caltech. Helios Labs was the company I created to hold the intellectual property. The confession, so simple and direct, short-circuited his rage, leaving only a humming disbelief. He sank into a nearby chair, shaking his head. No, that's not possible. I was the one who... He trailed off, trying to piece together his own memories that had been the bedrock of his reality. He remembered long nights, scribbling equations on whiteboards, the flash of inspiration. But as he tried to grasp the specifics, they were smoke. He remembered the business plan, the meetings with venture capitalists, the thrill of the pitch. He remembered being the salesman, the visionary, but the actual code, the deep, intricate architecture of it, had that been him? I met you a year after I filed the patents. Angie continued, her voice gentle, as if explaining a complex truth to a child. You were brilliant, charismatic, ambitious. You were everything I wasn't. I was a terrible saleswoman. I hated the spotlight. I loved the work, but I didn't have the personality to build an empire. You did. We were a perfect match. A match. He whispered the words, tasting like ash. You lied to me. For 10 years. A whole marriage. A whole life. It's a lie. It was never a lie, Cedric. It was a partnership, she said, her voice rising with a decade of suppressed frustration. A partnership you were never curious enough to question. Did you ever once ask me what I did at Caltech? Did you ever read my thesis? Did you ever wonder why our hobby room has a direct, redundant fiber optic line to the global exchange? I gave you hints I tried to contribute. But you were so wrapped up in your own myth that you dismissed my insights as woman's intuition. You saw what you wanted to see, a supportive, simple wife. The accusation hit him harder than any of Reed's corporate attacks. He thought of all the times she'd made a quiet suggestion he'd later claimed as his own brilliant idea. He thought of the file that had magically appeared on his desk. He thought of her asking him to look at the researcher's funding. It was all clicking into place, a horrifying, ego-crushing mosaic. His confusion curdled back into a desperate, wounded rage. This wasn't just about the company. It was about his very identity. So what was I? He sneered, his voice dripping with venom. Just the pretty face you hired to front your company. I fell in love with you, she retorted, her composure finally breaking. I wanted to build a life with you, and yes, a part of that was building this company together. I handled the technology, the long-term strategy. You handled the board, the market, the public. And it worked, Cedric. It worked perfectly until your pride grew so large it blinded you. My pride, he laughed, a bitter, broken sound. You're the one who has been playing God from behind a curtain. What about Phoenix? This genius hacker everyone is looking for. Is that you too? Angie looked him directly in the eye, her gaze unwavering. She didn't have to answer. He saw it in her face. The final piece of the puzzle slotted into place, and his world, the one he thought he had built from the ground up, shattered into 1,000,000 pieces. He wasn't the king. He wasn't even a knight. He was a pawn, and he'd never even seen the player. The unraveling was complete. The final emergency board meeting was scheduled for 10:00 a.m. the next day. The agenda was brutally simple, a vote on the removal of Cedric Hollander as CEO of Aura Corp. Gideon Reed had been invited to present his case. It wasn't a meeting. It was an execution. Cedric arrived looking like a ghost. He hadn't slept. The confrontation with Angie had replayed in his mind all night, each word a fresh wound. He had moved from rage to a deep, hollow despair. Everything he had defined himself by, his intellect, his power, his creation, was a fiction. He was an actor who had just discovered his entire life was a script written by someone else. He took his seat at the head of the long boardroom table, but he felt no ownership of it. The other board members, including a grim-faced Abernathy, avoided his gaze. Then Gideon Reed entered. He was the picture of victory, his suit sharp, his smile thin and predatory. He nodded curtly at Cedric, a gesture of dominance, not respect. "Ladies and gentlemen," Reed began, his voice smooth and confident. "We are here because of a crisis of leadership and a fundamental deception at the heart of Aura Corp. Mr. Hollander has built his career on a myth. The very intellectual property of this company, as evidenced by the documents I provided, originated not with him, but with a third party, a Angelica Pierce, whose connection to the company remains unclear. This creates an unacceptable risk for shareholders." He went on laying out his case with cold precision. He spoke of the lost clients, the market instability, and the structural rot within the company. He proposed himself as an interim CEO, promising to stabilize the company conduct, a full audit of its IP, and restore shareholder confidence. Cedric listened numb. He had no defense. To defend himself would be to perpetuate the lie, and he was too broken to do it. To tell the truth would be to admit his entire career was a sham. He remained silent, a statue of a CEO, waiting for the inevitable axe to fall. "It's time to vote," Abernathy said, finally, his voice heavy. But before he could call the question, the double doors of the boardroom swung open. Every head turned. Standing in the doorway was Angelica Pierce. But this was not the quiet, demure Angie they knew from galas and charity events. She was dressed in a razor-sharp, dark grey business suit, her hair pulled back in a severe, elegant style. Her face was devoid of its usual pleasant smile, replaced by an expression of absolute command. Flanking her were two people, Dr. Lena Hansen, whose name was legendary in cybersecurity circles, and a formidable-looking man in a pinstripe suit, clearly a high-powered lawyer. A murmur went through the room. Cedric stared at her, his heart pounding. What was she doing? "I apologize for the interruption, Mr. Abernathy." Angie said, her voice clear and strong, resonating with an authority no one in that room had ever heard from her. "But I believe this vote is predicated on incomplete information." Gideon Reed sneered. "Mrs. Hollander, I'm sure your concern for your husband is touching, but this is a board matter." "My name is Angelica Pierce," she corrected him, her eyes locking onto his with chilling intensity. "And this is very much my business. You've been asking questions about Helios Labs. Allow me to answer them." She walked to the head of the table opposite Cedric and placed a leather-bound portfolio down. Her lawyer began distributing documents to the stunned board members. "Helios Labs was the entity I created to hold my patents. Yes," she began. "After I founded Aura Corp with my husband, the assets of Helios Labs were transferred, not to Aura Corp as you assume, but to a parent company, a private holding firm named Helios Ventures." The lawyer cleared his throat. "As per the documents you now have before you," he stated, "Helios Ventures holds 72% of the voting shares of Aura Corp. It is the silent majority owner." A stone-cold silence fell over the room. Board members looked down at the papers in their hands, their eyes wide with shock. Gideon Reed's smug expression faltered. "And who?" Abernathy breathed, looking at Angie. is the principal of Helios Ventures. Angie gave a small, cold smile. I am the founder, the sole director, and the ultimate beneficial owner. Aura Corp is my company. It has always been my company. The revelation detonated in the room. Jaws literally dropped. Reed staggered back a step, as if he'd been physically struck. Cedric felt the last of the air leave his lungs. He knew she was the founder, the genius. But he never knew this. He never knew that in the legal, technical, and financial reality of their lives, he was not her partner. He was her subordinate. As the majority shareholder, Angie continued, her voice cutting through the stunned silence. I will not be accepting Mr. Hollander's resignation, nor will I entertain a vote for his removal. He has performed his duties as the public face and CEO of this company admirably for a decade. She paused, letting the implication of his duties sink in. Then she turned her full attention to Gideon Reed. Mr. Reed, your hostile takeover attempt was predicated on destabilizing our stock and poaching our clients. For the past 2 weeks, a mysterious entity has been stabilizing our stock price. That entity was a subsidiary of Helios Ventures. We were, in effect, buying our own stock at the discount you so kindly provided. Lena Hansen stepped forward, tapping on a tablet she was holding. The main screen at the end of the boardroom flickered to life, showing a complex diagram of financial holdings. Furthermore, Angie said, your entire operation is financed by the Creston Financial Group. As of 9:47 this morning, an anonymous consortium acquired a controlling interest in Creston Financial. That consortium was also me. Gideon, I am now your banker. And as your new banker, I am calling in your loans, all of them, effective immediately. I believe the total is in the neighborhood of $9 billion. I expect you'll find your assets frozen by the end of the day. Gideon Reed turned pale, a ghastly, chalky white. He looked from Angie to the screen and back again. He wasn't just beaten. He was annihilated. He had tried to raid a castle only to find out his opponent owned the entire continent. He opened his mouth, but no words came out. He turned and stumbled out of the room, a ruined man. Angie then turned her gaze back to the board. The identity of the shadow programmer Phoenix, who has been securing our systems, is Dr. Lena Hansen, on retainer with Helios Ventures, working under my direct supervision. The security of Aura Corp's core technology has never been compromised. In fact, it has never been stronger. She had answered every question, plugged every hole, and obliterated every threat in the space of 5 minutes. It was a display of power so total, so absolute, it left everyone breathless. Finally, her eyes met Cedric's across the table. The anger and hurt were still there, but for the first time he saw her. He truly saw the force of nature that had been living beside him, hidden in plain sight. The board meeting is adjourned. Angelica Pierce, the true CEO, said calmly. Cedric, my office. Now. The silent elevator ride to the top floor was the longest journey of Cedric's life. He stood opposite Angie, the polished steel walls reflecting the image of a broken man and a woman he no longer knew, wrapped in an aura of unassailable authority. When the doors opened into the sprawling corner office, his office, he felt like a trespasser. She walked to the floor-to-ceiling window, gazing out at the city. He remained by the door, the silence stretching between them until it was unbearable. Your office, he finally said, the words dripping with a pain so deep it sounded like venom. It was supposed to be ours, she replied, turning to face him. The corporate titan was gone, replaced by a woman whose eyes held a decade of weariness. Why Angie? He asked, his voice cracking. The shell company's the secret ownership. Why the lie? It wasn't a lie, Cedric, it was a partnership you were never curious enough to examine. She said, her voice soft, but unforgiving. I tried to tell you who I was, but you only ever saw what you wanted to see, a supportive, simple wife. Your ambition was magnificent, but your ego was fragile. I knew you could never be a partner to someone you saw as an equal, so you had to believe you were the king. I built you a kingdom and handed you the crown, hoping one day you'd be secure enough to see the architect standing beside you. You never were. The brutal honesty of her words stripped away his anger, leaving only raw humiliation. So I was a puppet, he spat. A fraud. My entire life, my reputation, it's all built on your work. The world thinks I'm a genius, but I'm just the front man for my wife. Is that all you think you are? She countered, stepping towards him. Who faced down the venture capitalists and made them believe, who inspired thousands of employees, who became the face of innovation? That was all you, Cedric. I wrote the music, but you were the conductor. You made the world listen. I fell in love with that man. Her validation felt like a poisoned balm. And Phoenix, he asked, was that just another way to prove how much smarter you are? Phoenix was a fail-safe. She retorted, her composure finally breaking. I created it to protect my life's work when your pride made you reckless. While you were busy fighting a war in the press, Gideon Reed was poisoning our foundation. I did what was necessary to protect the company, our company. He collapsed onto the leather sofa, his head in his hands. The sheer scale of her foresight was crushing. What now? He whispered, looking up at her defeated. Do you fire me? Announce to the world you're the real power. Take this office for yourself. Angie shook her head, a sad smile on her lips. I don't want this office. I never did. I want what I've always wanted. I want a partner, an equal. She knelt before him, her gaze intense. The world doesn't have to know the truth. You can remain CEO. But between us, things must change. No more secrets. No more dismissing my ideas. When I bring you a thought, it's not woman's intuition. It's a strategic analysis from your majority shareholder. The final two words hung in the air, a cold, hard statement of the new reality. He felt the floor drop out from under him again. I don't know if I can, he admitted, his voice raw with shame. To walk into a room with you and know, to look at myself in the mirror and know that I am. Know what? She pressed her voice, softening slightly. That you're married to a brilliant woman, that the foundation you're standing on is stronger than you ever imagined, or simply that your ego is no longer the biggest thing in the room. He pulled his hands away, unable to meet her eyes. I need time. Take it, she said, rising to her feet. But know this, Cedric. I didn't do this to humiliate you. I did this to save us. The company, yes, but our marriage, too. It couldn't survive on a lie forever. She walked out, leaving him alone, with the silent, gleaming monuments to a life he now understood was never truly his. The aftermath was not a fiery explosion, but a quiet, devastating earthquake that had leveled his world, leaving him utterly alone in the rubble. A month passed in a state of polite, distant silence. The penthouse was a gilded cage shared by two strangers. During that time, Cedric, stripped of his ego, walked the city for hours, replaying their entire relationship through the painful clarity of his newfound knowledge. The shame was a physical weight, forcing him to confront the hardest question of his life. Did he love the real Angelica Pierce, the genius who had so completely outplayed him? Or had he only loved the comfortable reflection of his own power? He found his answer one Saturday afternoon. Angie was in the living area, her laptop displaying complex biological and architectural renderings. Project Chimera, she said, without looking up as he approached. "It's a hybrid biological silicon processing unit. It learns, it evolves. It's 50 years ahead of anything on the market." He looked at the designs, and a forgotten spark of excitement ignited within him. "This is incredible," he breathed. "I can build it," she said, finally meeting his gaze. Her eyes were searching. "But the world will be terrified of it. I can write the code and engineer the hardware, but I need someone to tell the story. I need a partner to make the world believe in it, not fear it." It was an offering. In that moment, looking at the passion in her eyes, his shame and resentment dissolved, replaced by a profound, humbling awe. He had loved the idea of his perfect wife, but he was truly in awe of this brilliant, powerful woman. This feeling was real. A genuine smile touched his lips for the first time in weeks. The press will call it Frankenstein's monster. He said the old energy surging back, but different now. It wasn't just his. It felt like theirs. But if we frame it as augmented organics, a system that mimics natural processes to solve unnatural problems, we can control the narrative from the start. Angie's eyes lit up with shared excitement. The wall between them crumbled as they brainstormed for hours, no longer a king and a hidden power, but two brilliant minds in perfect sync. They were finally equals. The following Monday, Cedric Hollander walked into the Auracorp boardroom. A minute later, Angelica Pierce walked in and took the empty seat beside him at the head of the table. There was no announcement. There didn't need to be. "Good morning, everyone," Cedric said, his voice filled with a new, calmer confidence. He glanced at Angie, who gave him an affirming nod. "My wife and I," he announced, "have some exciting new ideas for the future of this company." It was a new foundation, built not on a comfortable lie, but on a complex and exhilarating truth. Their kingdom had been redefined not by a single ruler, but by a dual monarchy stronger than ever before. In the end, this was never a story about a corporate takeover. It was about the hostile takeover of a man's ego and the restructuring of a marriage. Cedric Hollander learned the hardest lesson of his life, that true power isn't about standing in the spotlight, but about building something that lasts, and that the strongest partnerships are forged not in dominance, but in mutual respect. Angelica Pierce finally stepped out of the shadows, not to claim a throne, but to share one. Their story reminds us that the people we think we know best often hold the deepest secrets, and that the most successful ventures in life, whether in business or in love, are the ones where we are brave enough to be truly equal partners. If their journey from a gilded cage to a true partnership resonated with you, and if you believe in stories where hidden strength is finally revealed, please show your support by hitting that like button. Share this video with someone who would appreciate a tale of corporate drama and personal revolution. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss our next story. Thank you for listening.